The Oklahoma City Thunder were outclassed in game number 5. Can they rebound in this series?
You are Locked On Thunder, your daily Oklahoma City Thunder podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Let's get it going on the Locked On Thunder podcast, on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am your host, media member, and Inside the Thunder beat writer Rylan Stiles. Follow me on Twitter at Rylan_Stiles. Follow the show on Twitter at LO Thunderpod. On today's show, we're diving into the Oklahoma City Thunder being outmatched, outclassed, outworked in game number 5. And now they're down 3-2 in the series. Is there any chance that they can recover from this massive blow in game number 5? There is so much to discuss, which I'm glad we have 2 off days to get it all done. The first and foremost thing is the Thunder were just simply outclassed tonight. You can dive into the changes to the starting lineup. You can dive into the roster or whatever you want to dive into. The bottom line is the Thunder once again could not hit the broadside of a barn shooting the basketball. The Mavericks played like the more intense team. They played like the team that wanted it more. They played like the team who's been in this spot before. And they won the game. The Mavericks once again had an incredible defensive effort. So did the Thunder. I think that anytime you lose, you automatically think back to a corner 3 that was open or whatever. If I told you before the series that the Thunder were going to hold the Mavericks to 105 twice, they got 104 tonight, but under 100 points, a couple times, like you would take this defensive effort wholeheartedly if you're Oklahoma City. 104 points should not be what dooms you against Luka, Doncic, and Kyrie Irving in the playoffs. It just shouldn't be. But right now, you don't have that second guy to go to besides Shai. Everyone else played bad offensively. The Thunder shot 42, 25, and 80 on the shooting splits, 25 from 3 as the best three-point shooting team in the NBA coming into the playoffs. It's just not good enough. Dallas shot 52, 40, 76. They made life easy going to those lobs, navigating the pick and roll, and Luka was phenomenal. Luka and Shai both were awesome. But the Mavericks win the rebounding battle, 46-33. That's pretty typical. What's gotten the Thunder to 57 wins. The Thunder turned the Mavericks over 14 times compared to just 6 turnovers of their own. That's pretty typical compared to what's gotten the Thunder 57 wins. Now, what wasn't typical? The Thunder lost points in the paint, 48-42. What was typical? The Thunder lost second chance points, 12-5. What wasn't typical? The Thunder lost fast break points, 10-8. You couple that with the poor three-point shooting yet again, and the fact that the Mavericks just were a more professional team. The Thunder made a change to the starting lineup, and it resulted in them getting up 6 early. It resulted in them staying in games, close at the beginning of the game, and they had it to a 2-point game at the end of the first quarter, and this was a better, more competitive first quarter than what you're used to seeing. But the Mavericks went on their run eventually. They grew an 18-point lead in the fourth. Like eventually they grew a 15-point lead in the first half, and that's all she wrote. Like we already admitted that Monday was an anomaly in terms of playing catch up against this Dallas Mavericks team. You're not going to be able to do that very often, as they have enough play finishers, they have enough stars to keep the Thunder at bay, keep them at arm's length, and they did just that yet again. And in reality, the Thunder are very fortunate that this is not the actual end of the series. Like this is not the death blow 4-1 series lead. The Mavericks collapsed in game 4. The Thunder took advantage of it in a big way, and they gave themselves a shot. What was discouraging is a few things, is that you didn't come out with your hair on fire for the sustained 48-minute game as Dallas did. I think that Dallas, again, outworked OKC in some stretches. Dallas, this whole series, has won the emotional gaps battle of being able to recover and bring the necessary physicality and intensity to these games. Many a times where the Thunder just looked skittish out there. I mean, there was a moment in this game where Derrick Jones Jr. decides to hip check Isaiah Joe instead of getting a rebound, forfeiting possession for the sake of sending a message to Isaiah Joe. Not a soul on the Thunder cared. No one made an attempt to disrupt that. Little things like that do matter and go a long way in setting the tone and setting the tenor of what kind of team you are, what respect you have for your opponent. The Mavericks have done a fantastic job working the refs. The Thunder really have not throughout this time. It is what it is at this point. I think that we're going to dive into all these different convoluted layers of what happened, what went wrong, where the Thunder go from here. But whenever we were previewing this series, you would have 100% been content and known that, like, hey, the Thunder shoot 25%, they're going to lose the game from three. Like that's just the bottom line. You once again get a disappearing act from J-Dub, you're going to lose the game. Now, that's a lot to ask of J-Dub. And let's talk J-Dub first. J-Dub was not J-Dub in this game, and he hasn't been all series. He's been a shell of himself. He's been awful in the closing moments of these games, except for Game 4 and Game 1, where he was good in the closing moments, but not good overall in Game 4. He has not been good this series as a scorer. And it was always going to be an uphill battle to ask your sophomore player to be the co-star. But to that point into Game 1, he had proven that he could do it. He had proven that he was worth taking the shot on him being your co-star. And this is not an indictment on J-Dub moving forward. End of the day, he did not get it done this series. He did not play well this series. He was not the scorer that you thought he was this series. But this is try number 1 for J-Dub in the playoffs. I would refer you back to SGA, who's had nothing but an unbelievable playoffs against the Dallas Mavericks. An unreal series where he's literally dragging you in these games, willing you in these games. I'd refer you back to the bubble, where he had much more help than Jalen Williams does. Right? He had Chris Paul as a veteran leader who's been there, done that. He had Dennis Schroeder, who was really good that season. Like, he had these guys around him where he was the third option, and even as the third option, as an underdog, no pressure, no crowd, no travel, just hoops. Even in that environment, Shai was not good in the bubble playoffs. He just wasn't. So J-Dub has not been good in the real, like legitimate playoffs as a co-star. That doesn't mean he can never figure it out. That doesn't mean he can never improve and get better in that area. I think that he will. But whenever we go back to the October podcast where we're talking about, going through the battles and going through the wars, that was before we knew how uncommon this team would be throughout the regular season. Like, this is part of it. Part of it is not letting Isaiah Joe get hip checked and just standing by willy-nilly. Not letting Luka Doncic, as great as he is, talk as much crap as he wants to talk after each bucket. Like, part of that is having somebody to step up in those moments. Part of it is understanding what it takes. Like, the Thunder have been way too relaxed. And that's tough as your first go of it, to find that middle ground of the lights being too bright and you're pressing and doing too much and playing out of sorts and frantically throwing the ball over the place and just not playing well, versus playing too relaxed and not understanding what's on the line and not understanding that, like, your season is in the balance and things of that nature. This was not 0-0. This was 2-2 with a pivotal Game 5 that swings the series, where now you have two of the best closeout players in the world getting 2 cracks at winning the series versus your opportunity to prolong the series on Saturday and hope in Game 7 that things break your way. This was massive. And the Thunder just never had that sense of urgency displayed, really, besides the 9:30 and beyond mark in the Game 4 in the fourth quarter. Like, after that Kiddey Hustle technical, they got into a sense of urgency. Hasn't been the case otherwise this series. But again, J-Dub, first and foremost, if I told you 2 Sundays ago that he was not going to be the co-star you think he is, he's not going to be the scorer you think he is, we would not have to have any sort of diatribes or rants or anything else about the future of this team, the roster construction, or the matchup. If I told you that 5 Sundays ago, heading into New Orleans, that he was not going to score in the playoffs, you'd have said they would have lost to New Orleans, no matter how unhealthy the New Orleans Pelicans were. Like, this was always going to go as far as the big 3 goes. And we'll talk about the trade deadline stuff tomorrow. I think that's a more big picture conversation that we can't cram into a recap podcast. But no matter what you wanted this team to do at the trade deadline, it was always going to be the big three of Shai, J-Dub, and Chet. And to this point, two of the three have not been good enough offensively. And no matter who you added at the deadline, that was going to be the case. And the archetype of player that people are clamoring that the Thunder should have added at the trade deadline was not going to help you shoot better. You ran into a fantastic team. First and foremost, the Mavericks have carried over their round one defense to round two with this fantastic communication, fantastic switching ability. It's been awesome to see from Dallas. Number two, you also have had your worst shooting stretch of the year, even on open looks. And mixing that with how good Dallas has been defensively, then, of course, it gets even worse. And then it's been a complete no-show from J-Dub. Complete no-show. Barely any flashes. But he'll learn and grow from this, as will the whole team. So this is valuable stuff, no matter how the rest of the series unfolds. The Mavericks are firmly in the driver's seat. It's hard to envision the Thunder being able to shock the world yet again and come back in this series, as the Mavericks have two shots to close it out, one at home and one in a building that they're clearly comfortable in. They've already stolen two in OKC. They've already very thoroughly won two in OKC, I should say. So it's tough to imagine that this series goes any differently than Dallas, whether it's in 6 or 7. But that's what's made the Thunder so interesting this year, is that they've always shocked the world. They've always played their best when their back's against the wall. No matter what, though, even if the series is over, this is going to be extremely valuable for them. We're going to dive into all the ways it is, including the lineup change that happened and more. But first, I want to say right now, but our good friends over at eBay Motors. Check out eBay Motors today. They are fantastic. They have all the parts that you want for your vehicle. They understand that just like winning a championship in basketball, patience, drive, and passion is with the winning formula for your car as well. So eBay Motors has everything you want to maintain your vehicle or level it up to peak performance with superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts to choose from, your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for with eBay Motors Guaranteed Fit. It's the guaranteed fit to fit your ride every time. The first time, your money back, because with eBay Motors, you're going to be burning rubber, not cash. Go there right now. At the prices you want, you got the parts that you need. It's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home the huge win at eBay Motors, keeping your ride or die alive. ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. And, of course, terms and conditions. eBay Motors Guaranteed Fit, only available for U.S. customers only. We're back on the Locked On Thunder podcast, on the Locked On Podcast Network, your teams every day. Well, I think that with this Thunder team, they did make the change in the starting lineup, but one that was interesting to see on a multitude of levels. So Josh Giddey goes to the bench. They lost the game, so people are going to look back on that, and if you're in the overwhelmingly pro Josh Giddey category, you'll say, well, that move didn't work. Actually, it did. They got to a better start than they otherwise have this series, but it did not result in them getting a win. The Mavericks still went on that run eventually. You can talk about why they went on that run, but they went on that run eventually to grow a lead. It just didn't happen right out of the gate, as Josh Giddey was a -3 off the bench in 11 minutes. But they did change the starting lineup, and I think that that's a move that you cannot criticize. If you're on any side of the aisle, it was a well thought out move. You can argue it even happened a little bit too late, but nonetheless, this is a pivotal game that's going to swing your season one way or the other. You have ample data points on Josh Giddey in this matchup not being good. You go for the quicker start. You go with Isaiah Joe. You get that quicker start out of the gate and still lose. I think that the thought process, though, was sound. Just like we said in this podcast, Mark echoed that post-game. The reason you bench Josh Giddey is in turn beneficial to him as much as it is to the rest of the team. Like you bench Josh Giddey, you get him more chances on ball when he comes back into the game off the bench. It was, I think, honestly, a little bit thought-provoking of like, here's a team that all you've heard about is roster exploration and exploring every lineup, getting as many data points as possible, And in the biggest moments, we all knew the change had to be Josh Giddey coming out of the starting five. But this was the first time in his career he's ever sat the bench. This is not the first time in his career he's ever had a bad stretch, folks. Australian or not, you can be honest with, he's had some very bad stretches this season. To never have given yourself a look at the picture without Josh Giddey in the starting five, he started all 218 games of his career, was interesting for a team that cares so much about development and roster exploration. They went with Isaiah Joe. Look, I can't sit here and tap dance around benching Josh Giddey. Then whenever they finally do, criticize that move too. I understand the process, the thought process behind keeping Kaysen on the bench. That's who I would have started, as I said on the podcast before the game. I would have started Kaysen, but I understand the thought process of like, hey, here's a guy that we can get into the game very fresh to defend Luka, defend Kyrie, the tallest orders on the other side. Wiggins, he has not exactly been the player that you thought he would be in this series. And Isaiah Joe has fared well against OKC, against Dallas, and has the potential to be the perfect option for the starting five, where he's not going to be a guy who needs the ball. He's going to play good enough defense to warrant him being on the floor, and he's your best option to knock down threes. He happens to go 2 for 8 tonight, just as the team struggles at all cost from three. But again, Josh Giddey was a -3, not a -20 like he was a couple of nights ago. This move still worked. It didn't work in the grand scheme of the win, but they started faster. Josh Giddey played better. Those are two things that you were trying to solve with this move. You would hope it would have led to the win, but it didn't. Those are two things you're trying to solve with this move, and you got them. I think from Mark's standpoint, the only gripe I really have with him is one. I think that there was a moment in this game where you could have gotten a technical foul, and you could have just set the tone or worked the officials or just tried something to fire up your group whenever the game's lost. It's a 9-point deficit. It's a minute and a half to go in the fourth. Shai gets hammered and no call. You could have fought for your guy a little bit there just for the sake of doing it. But that would be completely out of character for Mark. So that's kind of a pipe dream, right? That'd be ridiculous. That'd be like asking me to have a Stephen A. Smith rant on the next pod. That's just not going to be my game. It's not going to be Mark's game. The only other gripe I would have with Mark is that Shai played 42 minutes, and on the surface this is going to sound stupid, as Luka only plays 41. But your back's against the wall in that fourth quarter. It is a do or die counterpunch time. You're running out of time. It's getting late early, and you start with SGA on the bench for 2 minutes, and you lose ground. To me, SGA, if you really wanted to get him some rest, in all likelihood you could have done that on the opposite side, in the sense of give it one last hurrah with SGA starting the fourth abnormally, right? Give it one last hurrah. If things are still slipping, as they eventually did, then you take him out on the back end of the game and he gets rest there. But to take him out after the third quarter, play those 2 minutes where you lose ground, I just didn't agree with that in the playoffs, in the biggest moment, biggest part of your season, yada, yada, yada. But other than that, at the technical foul thing, I personally would have went and gotten one. I know that's not Mark's game, so it's hard for me to say he should have acted out of character. The SGA starting in this fourth, again, it's stupid because he ended up playing 42 minutes, but that's just the point where SGA is a world-class athlete. He trains for these moments that your season's on the line. I would have just left him out there. But he's done everything else. He's benched Josh Giddey. He's not playing Gordon Hayward. At the end of the day, he's not going to go out there and shoot threes. And this is the silly part about whenever we evaluate coaches. I said what I would have done differently. I'm not saying Mark's perfect, but Mark's also not out there going 1 for 5 like Kaysen Wallace. He's not out there going 1 for 3 like Josh Giddey. Not out there going 1 for 3 like Jay Will. Right? He's not out there going 1 for 5 like Chet Holmgren. He's not out there going 0 for 3 like J Dub. He's not out there going 2 for 8 like Lou Dort, who is on a C-shot diet, just hammering away shots. He's not the one doing that. And what are you going to do? Right? We just rattled off every single player in the lineup. So you can't just say bench him, don't play him, don't give him shots. We all want Kaysen Wallace shooting threes. went 1 for 5. It happens. Like, that is completely abnormal. You'd all want Isaiah Joe shooting threes. He went 2 for 8. We all want Chet Holmgren shooting threes, even more threes. Like, you walk away from that game saying, why didn't Chet Holmgren shoot more? He went 1 for 5. So there's a certain aspect of this where, like, people hammer the coach just because the team lost, but he really did everything. He has this defense playing exceptionally well. Go through the scoring total against the Dallas Mavericks for the stretches that they've had. Right, they've had some massive stretches. That's obvious. But I want everyone to continue, and this is how I'm going to evaluate basketball the whole time we're on the show. Like, if I told you these things before the series started, what would you do? If I told you before the year started, before the series started, that Dallas would be held to 95, right? They'd be held to 95, 119, 105, 96, and 104. If I told you that before the start of the series, you would sign on the dotted line so fiercely you'd rip the paper. So the defense is there. The best three-point shooting team in the NBA, percentage-wise, is not shooting the ball well. Your sophomore, who's been a tough shot maker and a bucket getter for you down the stretch, is not getting you buckets. You've finally changed the starting lineup. And I know that, like, this is a conversation that, like, we've been having a lot about the starting lineup, and, like, why didn't you do it earlier? Honestly, it lasted to this point. You fought off having your back against the wall. This was a swing game that could have put you in the driver's seat, and this is the time that you still make the move. I give him credit for not falling into being complacent after getting a win on Monday, not letting that kind of masquerade the fact that you needed to make a change. So, at a certain point, it's on the players. And just because it's on the players this year does not mean that it's an indictment on what they're going to do in the future either. This is still a fantastic team. This is still a team that has a fantastic future. But this was the team that was never going to be ready this year. In all honesty. They showed flashes of, like, whoa, maybe they can be an outlier. And if they somehow pull off 2 straight wins, then they absolutely are an outlier. But, like, losing this series to this team, to these closeout stars, to this experience of a bunch that's been to Western Conference Finals before, like, losing this series does not change anything. You still had a heck of a year. But the bottom line is you can never have those lulls against Dallas. That lull will put you behind 14, 15 points. Had an 8-0 run where you're laboring to get to an 8-0 run and get the stops and scores required. And that 8-0 run where you're feeling good into a timeout makes it a 10-point game. Dallas leads by 10. Like, that's how good Dallas is. And so there's a certain aspect where you just have to give credit to and tip your cap to Dallas. And understand that, like, this has not been a normal series. Dallas has played otherworldly defense. Good job by them. They've been great at the defensive end since the deadline. You've missed a ton of threes that you typically hit, including open ones against that still tough Dallas defense. And your young stars did not perform. Coming up, let's talk about what this series means, where this series goes from here. But first, once here right now, our good friends over at BetterHelp. Check out BetterHelp today because BetterHelp is awesome. It is great. I think that sometimes we all need that opportunity to get something off of our chest, whether it's big or small. Certain things can really start to fester with you, and it's important to let them out, especially to someone who's unbiased in your life. So today, I want to tell you that you should check out BetterHelp because BetterHelp is great. I think that a lot of people can understand that, like, hey, you could use the benefits of therapy, but you always stop yourself of, well, I just don't have enough time. I can't go to a brick and mortar building and go find a therapist in person and take away from the life I lead with family obligations, work obligations, whatever. That's where BetterHelp comes in because BetterHelp is entirely online. It's entirely flexible. It's entirely suited around your schedule with licensed therapists there to help you out. So go there right now to betterhelp.com/LockedInNBA. That's betterhelp.com/LockedInNBA for 10% off your first month. That's betterhelp.com/LockedInNBA for 10% off your next month. We're back on the Locked On Thunder podcast and the Locked On Podcast Network, your teams every day. Thank you so much for making us your first listen every single morning, every single day. We're here for you talking Thunder basketball. Folks, what a time. On tomorrow's show, we're diving into the trade deadline. and taking your questions and taking your takeaways to try to bring you some of the clarity I think that is needed after an emotional game like this one. But for today, we're going to leave you with a few things, trying to put some odds and ends together. We're going to talk all summer long about the lessons that these players can learn, but I do think it's important to hammer home, like Shai in his first two postseasons, and really I'll count that bubble one as his first postseason, given the fact that like he was looked upon and he was a guy who was vital. He was awesome as a Clipper, vital to their defense, everything else. But like it was just different in OKC. It was in the bubble, no fans, no travel, no nothing. Playing a team that they had Russ and Harden, and you had a veteran leader to take you under his wing that's been there, done that in every aspect of the sport, and he still did not play well. And look at him now. Look at what that's given him now to this point. This is the first time that J-Dub will have a postseason to look at and learn from. Same for Chet Holmgren. Now for Chet Holmgren, look at what J-Dub did. J-Dub, his first time seeing NBA pictures, going into a summer, getting some time off to develop, and then coming back, he's a completely new player. The same thing will happen for Chet. These guys have an unbelievable work ethic. And then you wonder what this series looks like if the Thunder hit their threes to the clip that they did in the regular season. And if you're Dallas, you wonder what this series looks like if Kyrie has a normal series in terms of scoring the basketball, as he once again only has 12. You wonder what this series looks like if Luka was not hobbled, although it's tough to make the case that he's incredibly hurt after the way that he moved in this one. But of course, earlier in the series, he was really, really, really hurting. I think that Dallas got the mixture that you need. Like you can go back and listen to the Locked On Mavericks crossovers. Like you're going to get a Luka game. You're going to be able to spoon feed some of the bigs in the pick and roll a little bit, and then who's going to step up? It's been PJ Washington to this point. You finally contain PJ Washington to the tune of 10 points. Well, here comes 19 from Derrick Jones Jr. Right? Like they've always had a guy step up. We've gotten 9 points from Gafford, 11 points from Lively, 19 points from Derrick Jones Jr., 10 points from PJ Washington, and that's all you need. You even got a tough bucket in there from Jaden Hardy. I think that this series has gone about as you'd expect. Like the inverse would be true had the Thunder shot lights out. If the Thunder were shooting the piss out of the ball, as Shai said about PJ, like if the Thunder were shooting the piss out of the ball, then we wouldn't be having this discourse about what the Thunder did or didn't do at the deadline and who the Thunder did or didn't bring in down low or whatever else. We'd be having the conversation of this style of play continues to work. That's how finicky, that's how fickle this stuff is. And so you ran into a hell of a player and Luka Doncic. You ran into your worst shooting stretch of the season. You ran into your number two player regressing just as theirs have. Credit to Kyrie. Credit Kyrie. Kyrie's not scored the ball well. Jay does not score the ball well. But your complementary pieces have not been even at all. And here you sit. Now, I think that the series is over in the sense of winning it. If I had to bet, I would bet on Dallas. You give two of the best closeout players in the world 2 chances to close you out. And especially, as we mentioned, they've been comfortable coming in this building. So you kind of shrug your shoulders there. But every time you count this Thunder team out, every time you put a ceiling on this Thunder team, they've been able to respond. They've been able to buck trends. They've been able to bust through. So what I would say for Thunder fans, I know it hurt as soon as the buzzer sounded, but trust me, we're going to be here for you every single day of the summertime. It's going to be a long summer. The only thing we'll have left to talk about is what they did or didn't do in the deadline, what they will or won't do in the summertime, what they will or won't do in the draft, what they will or won't do in free agency, how these players will or won't improve, what has to change, what has to get fixed. That's all we're going to worry ourselves with from the time that this season ends until August 1st next year. We're going to have a long daily grind ahead of us talking about this stuff. So don't let your mind wander just yet to the future of the roster and what they can do on the trade market, what they can do in the draft. Just enjoy however many more games there are left, whether it's 1, 2, or a whole new series if they can somehow win 2 in a row. Enjoy it. Let's see where they land, and remember how special this season is. 57 wins, number one seed, youngest number one seed of all time. You saw Shai take another leap where he was top 5 in MVP last year. Now he's top 2, and he was number 2 this year in MVP. Like you saw it. You saw Chet show you why you pick up number 2, the only top 5 pick on this roster. You saw a pathway for how good this team can be. And this was their first go at it. They went from 2 rebuilding years to the play-in to the second round. Pretty good stair step. And people are so consumed with like, well, the last team was supposed to dominate the league and they only got one finals run. Well, this was never supposed to be their finals run this year. That last team had a 2011 run where they lost in 5 to Dallas and didn't play well in the playoffs and then went to the finals the very next year. And that last team had many seasons plagued by injury where, like if this team goes through injury spells, they're not going to be contenders that year. That'll be the case no matter what happened at the deadline this year, no matter what happened with this team in this series or how well they shot or didn't shoot. So like that stuff, like this team as healthy as you can be throughout the course of a season, they're going to be contenders for a next half decade. This is just the beginning. You have so many opportunities to improve this roster both this summer, both at the next deadline, both next summer, both internally and externally. This is going to be the worst version of the Thunder. The worst version. And you're already saying how they could have gone to the Western Conference Finals. So they might still go to the Western Conference Finals. Just let yourself enjoy whatever's left of this series. Whatever's left of this season. Then we'll talk about the future because we'll have plenty of time to do it. Speaking of, again, this has been so fun. Covering this season. This podcast has been through the bubble playoffs all the way through now. Every single day. Will be every single day this whole summertime as we transition into off-season content with the draft, fake trades, all that good stuff, mailbags, all that great stuff. But I could not have done it without all of your support, both back then in the bubble playoffs, if you've been listening that long, or up to today. It was so fun meeting, I think 3 or 4 of you guys came up to get stickers. That was awesome. Again, I have stickers at these games, Locked On Thunder stickers, if you care to get one or just want to say hi. I really appreciate meeting all of you. This has been awesome. It continues to be awesome. It continues to be a big blessing. So until tomorrow, as we do it all again, talking Thunder basketball, be good and be good to one another.